They thought 5 against 1 was a guaranteed win, until their leader ended up begging for mercy under the city's cold lights. What started as a simple mugging turned into their worst nightmare. But trust me, this was never just about the fight. Let me show you what happens when you mess with the wrong guy. The night in downtown Los Angeles was the kind that felt alive and eerie all at once. Streetlights flickered, casting jittery shadows, and the occasional hum of passing cars created a rhythm that seemed to echo Keanu's own thoughts. He wasn't out looking for trouble, not tonight. All he wanted was a quiet moment, maybe a decent cup of coffee, but life had other plans. It always did. Keanu, a 32-year-old African-American Navy SEAL on leave, moved with the kind of grace that came from years of training and discipline. His leather jacket hugged his frame, aviators perched on his nose like he didn't care that it was already dark. He was the kind of guy who drew attention, but not in the way he liked, and tonight, he was being watched. A gang of 5 men trailed him from the opposite side of the street. They weren't subtle, mismatched hoodies, sneakers scuffing against the pavement, and the kind of swagger that screamed trouble. Their leader, Jake, stood out, a wiry guy with a scar running across his cheek like a badge of honor. His laughter was low and mean as he whispered to his crew, "Look at him. Mr. Tough Guy thinks he's untouchable. Easy target." And so, Keanu wasn't the type to miss details. The glances, the muffled snickers, the way they matched his pace, it was all too familiar. He sighed, keeping his eyes forward, his posture loose but ready. Years of training had taught him to read situations like this in seconds. His mind flicked through escape routes, strategies, the layout of the streets. Rule 1, don't start it, but always be ready to end it. The alley shortcut was a risk, but Keanu took it anyway. It was narrow and dimly lit, the kind of place that screamed bad decision to anyone else. To Keanu, it was just another stage. "Hey, big guy," Jake's voice cut through the quiet like a serrated blade. The gang had moved fast, cutting him off and spreading out in a semicircle. "Got $1 to spare?" The smirk on his face wasn't friendly. It was a predator's grin, daring him to say no. Keanu stopped. The shadows cast by the flickering streetlight stretched his silhouette, making him look larger than life. His voice was calm, steady. "Sorry, not tonight." Jake's smirk deepened, twisting into something more dangerous. "That's not a request." The crew tightened their circle, closing the gap like wolves on a hunt. From the corner of his eye, Keanu caught the glint of rust on a crowbar. It was in the hands of Tony, a heavy-set guy who looked like he'd never met a challenge he couldn't smash. "Hand over the wallet or we'll make you regret walking down here." Keanu tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into the faintest hint of a smile. "Regret," he said, his voice as smooth as steel. "You don't even know what that word means yet." The gang laughed, a short, mocking sound. They thought he was bluffing, mistaking his calm for weakness. Jake gave a quick signal with his hand, and Tony took the first swing. Big mistake. Keanu moved like water, his body flowing out of harm's way in one smooth motion. Tony's crowbar swiped through empty air, throwing him off balance. Before he could recover, Keanu stepped in, twisted his arm, and relieved him of the weapon. It was so fast, so clean, that the gang froze for a second, disbelief etched on their faces. Keanu held the crowbar loosely in his hand, his gaze sweeping over the group. "Walk away," he said, his tone low and commanding, like he was giving them a chance they didn't deserve. "Now." Jake's expression darkened, his ego taking the hit harder than Tony's pride. "You're dead meat, man," he growled, pulling out a switchblade. The metallic click echoed in the alley, the sound bouncing off the walls like a challenge. Keanu sighed, the kind of sigh that said, "Here we go again." His mind was already working, calculating angles, distances, the strength of his opponents. The gang, bolstered by their numbers, closed in, confidence dripping off them like sweat. Jake lunged first, blade flashing under the streetlight. The rest followed, a chaotic wave of aggression. Keanu didn't flinch. He was built for moments like this. Jake's punch came in wide and wild, the kind you'd expect from someone used to scaring people, not actually fighting them. Keanu didn't just duck. He flowed under it like the guy was moving in slow motion. The blade swiped at empty air, and before Jake even realized his mistake, Keanu's elbow connected with his ribs. The dull thud was followed by Jake's grunt as he stumbled back, clutching his side like someone had stolen his breath. "Bad idea," Keanu muttered, tossing the crowbar to the side. It clanged against the ground, the sound echoing like a warning. This wasn't about weapons anymore. It was about control. The gang froze for half a second, their confidence cracking. Then, like a pack of cornered animals, they surged forward, fists swinging, feet kicking. It was pure chaos, but Keanu, he was the eye of the storm. His training didn't just kick in, it owned the moment. Every move was sharp, precise, like he was playing a game he'd already won. A roundhouse kick sent one guy flying into a trash bin, the lid slamming shut behind him like a punchline. Another thug, armed with a chain, barely got a chance to swing before Keanu's jab hit home, sending the weapon clattering to the ground. "You think this is a game?" Jake spat, his voice ragged with frustration. He straightened up, his hands still pressed to his ribs, and whistled. The sound cut through the chaos like a blade. From the shadows, two more guys appeared. One had a wooden bat, the other a taser, sparking menacingly in the dim light. "Backup." "Great." Keanu tilted his head, his lips quirking into something between a smirk and a shrug. "You brought friends? Cute. Guess it's a party now." The guy with the taser moved first, lunging at Keanu with the chiatsa, the kind of confidence that screamed rookie mistake. Keanu sidestepped so smoothly it looked like a dance move, grabbing the guy's wrist and twisting it just enough to make him drop the weapon with a yelp. The taser hit the ground with a crackle and a pop. Bat Guy tried to use the distraction to his advantage, creeping up from behind like he had the upper hand. He didn't. Keanu spun on his heel, a clean kick landing square in the guy's chest. The bat slipped from his hands as he hit the ground, groaning like he'd just realized he'd made some very poor life choices. By now, the alley was a battlefield of groaning bodies and scattered weapons. Keanu stood in the center, calm, his breathing steady, like he'd just finished a light workout. But Jake wasn't about to let this slide. "You're messing with the wrong people," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain of trying to sound tough. His face was red, his hands shaking as he pulled a handgun from his waistband. The metallic glint caught the faint light, and for the first time, the gang's bravado faltered. Even the guys on the ground froze, their wide eyes darting between Jake and Keanu. The air turned heavy, like the whole world had stopped to hold its breath. Keanu's gaze locked on Jake, steady and unflinching. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked, his voice low and almost conversational, like he was asking for the time. Jake's hand shook, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Shut up, man. I'll do it," he barked, but the edge of his voice was fraying, unraveling under the weight of his own bluff. Keanu took a slow, deliberate step forward, his hands raised in a gesture that was somehow both non-threatening and commanding. "You've already lost," he said, his tone firm but calm. "Put the gun down before this gets worse." For a moment, it was like the whole alley was holding its breath. The tension was suffocating, every second stretching out into eternity. Jake's face twisted, his bravado crumbling as his grip faltered. Then, breaking the silence, the distant sound of sirens began to wail. The red and blue lights flickered at the far end of the alley, growing brighter with every second. Someone had called the cops. Jake's panic was instant. His tough guy act melted away as he dropped the gun like it was burning his hand. "Scatter!" he shouted, bolting down the alley with his crew scrambling to follow. Keanu didn't move. He didn't chase them. He just stood there, his chest rising and falling steadily as the sirens grew louder, the flashing lights painting the walls around him. The storm had passed, but the lesson, that would linger. The red and blue lights bathed the alley in an almost surreal glow, bouncing off the brick walls and shattered bottles. The police cruisers screeched to a halt, and within seconds, officers spilled out, flashlights cutting through the gloom like searchlights. Keanu stood in the center of the chaos, hands raised in a gesture of calm compliance, his expression cool as ever. "Just cleaning up the neighborhood," he quipped, his voice carrying the kind of nonchalance that only someone completely in control could muster. The officers hesitated. Tension was thick in the air. A man surrounded by groaning bodies and scattered weapons wasn't exactly comforting. Then, recognition flashed across the face of one officer, Mitchell, a stocky guy with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow. "Keanu?" Mitchell stepped closer, his flashlight lowering slightly. Is that you? Keanu nodded, his lips curling into a faint smile. Good to see you, Mitch. Mitchell let out a breath, the kind of half-laugh that comes with relief and disbelief. Heard you were back in town. Didn't think I'd find you in the middle of this. He gestured to the downed gang members, some still clutching their ribs or moaning softly. Keanu shrugged, a subtle motion that somehow spoke volumes. They picked the wrong guy. The corners of Mitchell's mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh but knew better. Looks like they did. Behind them, the other officers got to work, cuffing the gang members and checking for weapons. Jake, the self-proclaimed leader, was hauled to his feet, his wrists locked in handcuffs. The fight had drained the color from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed. As the officers dragged him past Keanu, Jake finally spoke, his voice shaky and thin. Your Navy? The words hung in the air like a belated realization, the kind that hits too late to matter. Keanu didn't respond right away. He let the question linger, then smirked, a small, knowing curve of his lips. Something like that. Jake's shoulders slumped, all the fight gone. I didn't. Doesn't matter. Keanu's tone was even, but there was steel underneath. You made your choice. Jake looked like he wanted to say something else, maybe plead, but the officers didn't give him the chance. They shoved him into the back of a squad car, slamming the door shut with a finality that echoed through the alley. Mitchell turned back to Keanu, shaking his head slightly. You know, most people would have called us before it got to this. He gestured vaguely at the carnage. Keanu chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. Most people don't get targeted by gangs. Fair point, Mitchell sighed, glancing at the squad cars. Next time, maybe don't take on a whole gang by yourself? No promises, Keanu replied, the faintest hint of humor in his voice. As the last of the gang members were loaded into the cruisers and the scene began to quiet down, Keanu turned to leave. His silhouette, framed by the glow of the streetlights, cut a striking figure as he walked away. The city seemed to hold its breath for a moment, the quiet settling like a blanket over the chaos. But one thing was certain. Keanu had left an impression, not just on the gang, but on everyone who'd witnessed the aftermath. In a city where trouble was easy to find, he'd proven one simple truth. You don't mess with the quiet guy in the leather jacket. What would you do in Keanu's place? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. Like if this inspired you, your voice matters. This story was made to raise awareness and inspire positive change for a better world.